Hey folks! This week we are to discuss one of three cases detailing separate events that would likely result in a tort were they real situations. I've chosen to review and discuss case 1, in which the scenario suggests that a patient with Alzheimer's disease has physically assaulted a nurse. In this scenario, the nurse responds physically to protect themselves. The physical response of the nurse leaves the patient with an injury or injuries. We have been tasked with discussing the ethical and legal ramifications of this interaction, the rights of the patient in this scenario, the viabilities of a workers' compensation claim for such an event, and possible alternatives to the physical response of the nurse that would have resulted in a more desirable outcome for all those involved. Perhaps the easiest determination to make of those assigned to us are the ethical implications of a physical altercation with a patient that likely does not have capacity to make their own decisions. From a moral standpoint, the response of the nurse was almost certainly definitively wrong, not only due to the power imbalance between the two individuals, but also because the response would be effectively forbidden by the nursing code of ethics. An unnecessary physical response to a cognitively impaired patient violates almost every one of the primary ethical charges put forth by the American Nurses Association. Specifically, the core tenets of justice and non-maleficence would be violated because it is unjust to cause harm to an individual that is cognitively impaired if avoidable, and the harm caused violates the idea of non-maleficence itself. Legally, the nurse would likely have opened themselves up to a variety of punishments, including those from the facility, the state nursing board, and potentially in both a criminal and civil sense as well, depending on the context of the event. The nurse would very likely be cited for the intentional tort of battery, were charges to be drawn for this event. The course textbook states that any harmful or offensive touching without consent or reason can be considered battery in the eyes of the law. This type of tort requires that there was an intent to cause physical contact, that the contact does occur, that said contact is harmful, and that no consent was given or expected for the event. In this situation, intent would probably be the most challenging aspect to prove, as context would provide the grounds for harmful intent versus emergency response with an unintentional outcome. The linchpin in this discussion would probably be the determination of whether or not any reasonable individual could expect the physical response delivered by the nurse to cause harm beyond what was warranted for self-preservation. If the tort of battery is found to have been committed, both criminal and civil charges may be brought upon the nurse, again depending on the context of the event and the grounds for the determination. In citing the potential legal problems that the nurse may face, we have also identified some of the patient rights that may have been violated, namely the right to safe and effective treatment. A situation that results in physical injury to a patient is neither safe nor effective, and of course this patient should be afforded all the same rights as any other patient with regards to care. The dementia patient may have some slight alterations to their rights depending on their determined capacity. Namely, the patient may actually lose the right to bring up litigation for themselves if they are found to not have capacity to make their own decisions. However, in that event, a proxy or a surrogate would likely be named as the decision maker and would have the right to litigation moving forward. Similarly, adult protective services may also become involved in the event that staff of the facility where the event occurred or where the patient is being treated afterwards feel that abuse has taken place. According to the Health Resources and Service Administration, which itself is a division of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, that offers extensive training materials for healthcare professionals that interact with dementia patients, any of these individuals or groups could raise legal concerns, granted that they are the identified individual or groups legally making or caring for the patient when they were harmed. Depending on the legal determination of culpability, the nurse may be entitled to workers' compensation if there were to be an injury sustained during the incident. Though workplace violence is not unique to healthcare professionals, it is faced more frequently and reported significantly less frequently than in most other professions. According to the Joint Commission, only about 30% of registered nurses report any incidents of patient-related workplace violence, and they often cite the patient's inability to be held accountable as the reason for not reporting. A 2021 meta-study published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health that reviewed over 3,000 articles referencing nurses' experience in caring for individuals with dementia identified that there is a significant and immediate need to develop systematic means of providing safety measures in such cases. These cases would include ones like the one we've seen, and the emergency measures might be something like emergency alarms or acuity-based staffing, counseling options for nurses that experience workplace violence, violence, those and many other things. All of those factors would have played into the possibility of the nurse being awarded a workers' compensation in the scenario that we've been discussing. Specifically, some of the training measures involved, staffing guidelines that were adhered to, required safety systems, and even room layouts might all be considered during a workers' compensation case. If the facility is found to have insufficiently provided any of these or other requirements that are defined in the state code of care for patients without determination capacity, then it is likely that that individual would be awarded compensation. The compensation determination itself would also likely heavily depend on the determination of legality of the interaction and the nurse's response, as we outlined earlier. Finally, there's a need to discuss the appropriate response to physical assault by a patient. Workplace violence, as we said, is a constant concern for many in the medical field. Due to that concern, considerable effort is spent to avoid or mitigate the effects of this violence. Facilities and organizations train for nearly every conceivable event. However, occasionally a situation such as the one described earlier does occur, and a review of those actions are in order. According to a 2022 study on workplace violence in healthcare, some of the most effective measures in reducing instances and effects of workplace violence include installing physical barriers for protection from violent individuals, utilizing personal security alarm systems that can be made alert when a person's in a dangerous situation alone, clearly defining exit routes in all areas, conflict resolution simulation training for the workers at the facility, timely mandatory reporting systems, ensuring that workers themselves are not alone with potentially violent individuals, flowcharts for assessing and responding in emergency situations, and even in certain cases providing security personnel for the facility workers. Utilizing certain de-escalation techniques, taking advantage of the buddy system of patient care, personal alarm systems, more accessible routes to use if they needed to get out. All of these could have helped this nurse avoid this situation, or at least mitigated some of the physical problems they faced with their retaliation. In conclusion, workplace violence is a common occurrence to the healthcare professional, and unfortunately, the propensity for this violence to occur increases with diagnoses that result in a more confused and easily agitated patient, such as Alzheimer's disease. Being self-aware, prepared, and vigilant are the best tools that one can likely have to avoid workplace violence when possible. When it's not possible to avoid violence, it is important to take into account not only the safety of the patient, but also one's own safety when deciding on a course of action. Unnecessarily harsh or violent responses that result in patient harm should be avoided if at all possible. However, that idea must also be balanced with self-preservation. If a healthcare professional is injured on the job, they lose the ability to care for all of their patients. This not only affects the healthcare worker themselves, but also affects the patient population as a whole. The best outcome is one that minimalizes harm to the professional and the patient alike. I think that's probably going to cover everything, so thanks for listening, and I look forward to watching everybody else's videos. Have a good one.